You are a burden, Dad. My daughter Nia said those 4 words to me on my 71st birthday. That same night, my son-in-law Gavin handed me a black trash bag filled with my clothes and pointed to the garage. They kicked me out of the house I paid for to turn my bedroom into a yoga studio. As I lay on a cold cot next to my old toolbox, my phone buzzed. A notification from American Express. $30,000. 3 first-class tickets to Hawaii and a reservation at the Four Seasons. They were using my credit card to celebrate my eviction. I stared at the screen, and the sadness in my chest turned into something cold and hard. They thought they were dealing with a senile old man. They forgot that before I was a burden, I was a builder who knew how to demolish a structure just as well as I knew how to build one. Before I tell you how I ruined their paradise, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who paid for the roof over their head. I am Moses Carter, 71 years old, and I have spent my life working with concrete and steel. I built half the foundations in this suburb with my own 2 hands, sweating under the hot sun so my daughter would never have to know what a callus felt like. I thought I had raised a queen, but it turns out I raised a parasite who married a leech. It was supposed to be a celebration. The dining room table was set, but there was no cake. There were no balloons. There was just a single manila folder sitting on the mahogany table, a table I built in my workshop 20 years ago. My son-in-law Gavin sat at the head of the table. He is a man who wears suits that cost more than his monthly salary and drives a leased BMW he cannot afford. He cleared his throat, that nervous, arrogant sound he makes when he thinks he is being a businessman. "Dad, we need to have a serious conversation about the future," he said. He did not look me in the eye. He looked at the folder. "We have been reviewing our lifestyle goals, and frankly, having you in the main guest suite is no longer working for us." I looked at my daughter, Nia. She was tracing the grain of the wood on the table with her manicured finger, refusing to look up. She looked small, but her silence was loud. I waited. I have learned that in business and in life, the person who speaks first loses. Gavin continued, gaining a false sense of confidence from my silence. "Look, Moses, it is nothing personal. It is just about space. We are young. We have social circles. When we have friends over from the club, having an elderly man wandering around the living room, well, it kills the vibe. It makes people uncomfortable. The vibe. My presence in my own house was killing the vibe." I looked at Nia again. "Is this how you feel, Nia?" I asked. My voice was calm, deep, the voice of a man who has shouted over jackhammers. She finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. "It is hard, Dad. You forget things. You leave the TV on loud. My friends ask who the old man is. It is embarrassing. You are a burden on our marriage, Dad. We need our privacy. We need you to move to the garage for now until we can find a state facility that takes Medicaid." A state facility. I have millions in assets hidden in trusts and offshore accounts. Money I saved from selling my construction firm 15 years ago. They thought I was living on Social Security. They thought the monthly checks I gave them were from a meager pension. They had no idea. I stood up. I did not yell. I did not throw the glass of water in Gavin's smug face. I simply nodded. "I understand," I said. I walked toward my bedroom, the room with the bay window where my late wife Etta used to read in the afternoons. I wanted to gather my things with dignity. But when I opened the door, the room was already empty. My photos were gone. The quilt Etta made was gone. In the center of the room sat 3 large, black, heavy-duty trash bags. Gavin appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a smirk. "We packed for you, Moses. To save time. We need this room cleared out tonight. Naya has a contractor coming tomorrow to install the mirrors for her yoga studio." He kicked one of the bags with his polished shoe. "It is all there. The essentials. We put the rest in storage. Or the dump. I can't remember." I looked at the bags. My life reduced to garbage. I looked at Gavin. He was enjoying this. He felt powerful. He felt like the man of the house. He did not know he was standing on a floor I poured under a roof I framed, protected by walls I paid for. "Grab your stuff, old man," he said. "The garage has a cot. It is not the Ritz, but it is a roof. You should be grateful." I dragged the bags out of the room. They were heavy, filled with books and clothes, but my hands are strong. I walked past Nia in the hallway. She turned her back to me, pretending to adjust a painting on the wall. I walked out the back door, down the stone path, and into the detached garage. The air was cold. The smell of oil and gasoline filled my nose. It was a space for cars, not people. There was a dusty camping cot in the corner with a thin blanket thrown over it. I sat on the cot. My joints ached. The humiliation burned in my throat like acid. I could hear them inside the house. The muffled sound of laughter. The pop of a cork. They were drinking my wine. The vintage Cabernet I had been saving for my 75th birthday. They were toasting to my eviction. I sat there in the dark listening to the crickets and the sound of my own heartbeat. I thought about the day I signed the deed to this house. I put Gavin's name on it alongside Nia's because I wanted him to feel like a man like he could provide. I paid the down payment. I paid the mortgage for the first 5 years secretly so they could get on their feet. I created this monster. At 3:00 a.m., headlights swept across the garage windows. A luxury Uber SUV pulled into the driveway. I watched from the dusty window. Gavin came out first wearing a floral shirt and a straw hat. Nia followed wearing a sundress and pulling expensive luggage. Louis Vuitton. I paid for that luggage 2 Christmases ago. Gavin walked over to the garage door and banged on it with his fist. Boom. 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 Hey, Moses. Wake up. We are heading out. We need a break from all this stress. Do not forget to water the lawn. And stay out of the main house. The alarm is set and you don't have the code anymore. I watched them get into the car. They were laughing. They looked free. They looked rich. They drove away into the night, heading toward the airport, leaving me in the cold with trash bags. I sat back down on the cot and pulled my phone from my pocket. It was an old model, the screen cracked, but it worked. I saw the notification glowing on the screen, a charge alert from American Express. Transaction approved, Delta Airlines. 3 tickets. First class, Atlanta to Maui. Total $12,000. Transaction approved, Four Seasons Resort Maui. Prepayment, $18,000. $30,000. They had stolen my credit card, the black Centurion card I kept hidden in the false bottom of my old toolbox. They must have found it when they ransacked my room. They didn't know what the card really was. They just saw the name American Express and my name. They thought they could max it out and let the old man deal with the debt collectors. They were going on a vacation to celebrate getting rid of me paid for with my money. I looked at the phone. I looked at the trash bags. I looked at the oil stain on the concrete floor. The sadness evaporated. The grief for the daughter I thought I had vanished. In its place was the cold, calculating focus of a man who knows how to execute a demolition. I did not go to sleep. I did not water the lawn. I dialed the number on the back of my digital wallet app, the number for the Centurion concierge service. It rang once. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," a polite voice answered immediately. "How can we assist you tonight?" My voice was steady, gravel and steel. "I am looking at some unauthorized charges on my primary account. A trip to Hawaii. Oh, I see them, sir. For Gavin and Nia. Do you want to authorize these?" "No," I said. "I want you to flag them as fraud. I want you to cancel the return tickets immediately. I want you to call the resort and cancel the reservation effective this second. And then I want you to freeze every subsidiary card attached to my account." "Certainly, Mr. Carter. We will handle that right away. Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, looking at the dark house that was no longer my home. "I want to buy a debt. Connect me to my asset manager. It is 3:30 in the morning, but he will answer for me." I hung up the phone. The screen went black. I sat in the dark garage and waited for the sun to rise. They were in the air now, drinking champagne, thinking they had won. They had no idea that when they landed, they wouldn't be stepping into paradise. They would be stepping into hell, and I would be the one holding the pitchfork. I lay on the canvas cot while the air smelled of stale gasoline and damp concrete. Above me, through the ceiling joists, I heard the thud of footsteps. They were dancing. My daughter and her husband were dancing on the floorboards I laid with my own aching back 10 years ago. I heard the distinct pop of a cork. It was my 1995 vintage Opus 1. I had been saving it for a wedding anniversary that never came because my wife passed too soon. Now Gavin was guzzling it like cheap soda. I closed my eyes and saw the past. I saw my hands younger then, but just as rough, smoothing the wet concrete of the driveway. I saw myself framing the master bedroom, measuring the studs to the millimeter so Nia would be safe from the storms. I built this fortress to protect them. I never imagined I was building the castle for the very people who would throw me into the dungeon. The laughter upstairs grew louder. It was a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the garage ceiling. They were celebrating my removal. They were toasting to their freedom from the old man who paid the bills. I gripped the edge of the cot until my knuckles turned the color of ash. Let them drink. Let them dance. They did not know that the foundation they stood on was about to crack wide open. 3 hours later, the automatic garage door rumbled open. The sudden flood of headlights blinded me for a moment. A sleek black SUV idled in the driveway, its exhaust curling into the cold night air. Gavin stepped out of the house first. He was wearing a ridiculous floral shirt that looked like a bad joke on his pale frame. He dragged 2 massive suitcases behind him, the wheels scraping loudly against the pavement. He stopped by the garage entrance where I sat in the shadows. He leaned in, the smell of my expensive wine heavy on his breath. "Hey, old-timer," he said with a grin that made my stomach turn. "Don't forget to water the hydrangeas. And keep the noise down. The neighbors might call the cops on a vagrant." He laughed at his own wit. I said nothing. I just stared at him. Then came Nia, my little girl. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and sunglasses even though it was pitch black outside. She refused to look at the garage. She refused to look at the father who had carried her on his shoulders. She walked straight to the car, sliding into the leather back seat without a backward glance. She slammed the door shut. It sounded like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. The final verdict: guilty of being old. Guilty of being in the way. The car pulled away, disappearing down the street I had paved. Silence rushed back into the garage, heavier than before. But I did not feel lonely. I felt focused. I waited until the red taillights faded completely from view. I sat up on the cot and reached for my phone. It was a cracked, outdated Android that Gavin always made fun of. He called it a burner phone for a drug dealer. He had no idea what was hidden inside the battered leather case. I pried the back open. There, sandwiched between the plastic and the battery, sat a piece of black anodized titanium, the American Express Centurion card, the black card. It was heavy in my hand, cold and solid. It was the only remnant of the construction empire I had sold 15 years ago. I had kept it active for emergencies. This was an emergency. I dialed the number on the back. It rang once. A human voice answered immediately, crisp and professional. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. This is Elizabeth. How may we assist you at this hour?" My voice was steady, stripped of all emotion. "I need to make some immediate changes to my account security, Elizabeth." "Go ahead, sir. I am listening." "I need to initiate Protocol Alpha 9. There was a brief pause on the line, the silence of a professional who knows exactly what that code means. It means a total lockdown. It means a scorched earth policy for all authorized users. "Understood, Mr. Carter," she said, her tone shifting from helpful to urgent. "We are securing the main line. Please confirm your verbal password." "Jericho," I said. "Confirmed. What are your instructions?" I looked at the empty driveway. "Cancel the reservation at the Four Seasons Maui. Flag the tickets on Delta as fraudulent and revoke them immediately. They are mid-flight, but I want their return tickets voided before they land. And Elizabeth, freeze every supplementary card issued to Gavin Miller and Nia Carter. Set their spending limit to 0 effective immediately." "Consider it done, sir. The resort has been notified. The cards are declined as we speak. Is there anything else?" "No," I said, "that will be all for tonight." I hung up the phone and slid the black card back into its hiding place. I lay back on the cot and pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. For the first time in 24 hours, I closed my eyes. They were flying first class to paradise, drinking champagne and laughing at the old man in the garage. They had no idea they were flying straight into a hurricane. I poured boiling water into my chipped enamel mug and stirred the instant coffee granules until they dissolved into a black sludge. It was barely sunrise in Atlanta, the sky a bruised purple through the dusty garage window, but in Maui it was just past noon. I knew their flight had landed 40 minutes ago. I knew they had taken the private shuttle to the resort expecting cold towels and fresh papaya juice. I checked my old Timex watch. Right on time. My phone began to vibrate violently against the metal workbench, rattling a jar of loose screws. It was a video call from Gavin. I propped the phone up against a heavy tool battery and accepted the call. The screen immediately filled with the soaring vaulted ceilings of the Four Seasons lobby, teak wood and open air. But the focus was entirely on Gavin's face, which had turned a shade of violent crimson I had never seen before. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was screaming at a young woman behind the marble front desk. "Run it again," he bellowed, slamming his hand on the counter so hard the flower arrangement shook. I saw the heads of other guests turn in the background, wealthy tourists in linen shirts and designer sunglasses stopping their quiet conversations to stare at the man making a scene. The receptionist maintained her frozen professional smile, but her eyes were hard as flint. "Sir, the card has been declined for the third time," she said, her voice crisp enough to carry clearly through the phone speakers. "The account holder has flagged all activity as fraudulent and placed a hard freeze on the reservation." Gavin looked like he was about to have a stroke. "That is impossible," he shouted, spitting a little as he spoke. "I am the account holder." "Actually, sir," she corrected him, referencing her screen without flinching. "The primary card holder is a Mr. Moses Carter. He has also canceled the return flights with Delta effective immediately. You have no valid reservation and no way to pay for it." I watched Nia step into the frame. She looked small under her big floppy hat, trying to hide behind her sunglasses. She grabbed Gavin's arm, hissing at him to stop making a scene, but the damage was done. Security was already walking toward them. Two large men in tropical prints who did not look like they were there to offer lees. They were being evicted from paradise before they even unpacked their bags. Gavin finally looked at the phone. He saw my face. He saw the pegboard of tools and the unfinished drywall of the garage behind me. "Moses," he roared, his voice cracking. "What the hell is going on? Fix this. Fix this. Right now." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my bitter coffee. The steam rose up, fogging the screen for a second. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. This silence infuriated him more than any shout could have. "Are you deaf, old man?" he shouted. "The card is not working. You messed something up with the bank. Call them. Tell them it is a mistake. We are standing in the lobby like idiots." I cleared my throat. It sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. "There is no mistake, Gavin," I said. My voice was low and steady. "You told me I was a burden. You told me my memory was going. You told me I was too old to understand how the household worked. I guess you were right. I must have forgotten to authorize your vacation." Gavin's eyes bulged from his head. "You senile old bat," he spat. "You did this on purpose. You are confusing things. Unfreeze the card. We have no cash. We have no way to get a room." "That sounds like a problem for people who aren't burdens," I said. I leaned closer to the camera lens so he could see the bags under my eyes. "You said I was losing my mind, Gavin. Well, I guess I lost the password too. And I lost the PIN code. And I seem to have lost the desire to pay $30,000 for you to sip cocktails while I sleep next to a lawnmower on a canvas cot." Nia grabbed the phone from him. Her face was pale, the expensive sunglasses pushed up on her head, revealing eyes wide with panic. "Daddy, please," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't funny. We are in Hawaii. We don't have anywhere to go. The hotel won't let us check in without a card. We don't have enough cash for a flight back. Daddy, stop this." I looked at my daughter, the girl I put through college, the woman who watched her husband bag up my life and did nothing. "You wanted privacy, Nia," I said. "You wanted space. The public beach has plenty of space. It is free." I reached out and tapped the red button ending the call. I did not block them yet. I wanted to see the fallout. And it came. A flurry of texts pinged my phone, one after another. Pictures of them sitting on their suitcases on the concrete curb outside the resort entrance. Then the fighting started. I got a text from Nia saying Gavin was yelling at her in front of the valet. I got a text from Gavin blaming Nia for having a crazy father. They were turning on each other. Without my money to glue them together, their marriage was just two shallow people trapped on an island. They ended up checking into a hostel 3 miles from the beach, a place with bunk beds and shared bathrooms. I looked up the rates online, $40 a night. I hoped they had enough cash for sunscreen. I finished my coffee and washed the mug in the utility sink. The sun was fully up now. I had a busy day ahead. I had to go to the bank and then I had to visit a man about a lock. The demolition had only just begun. I waited until the sun was high in the sky before I made my move. I wanted the neighbors to see me walking from the garage to the front porch. I wanted them to see Moses Carter entering his own home through the front door like a man who owned the place, because I did. I retrieved the spare key I kept buried in the potting soil of the dead fern Nia never watered. The lock turned with a heavy click. The air inside the house was stale. It smelled of expensive cologne and rotting garbage. It was the scent of people who consume everything and clean nothing. I walked past the living room where my favorite armchair sat covered in a pile of Gavin's dirty laundry. I didn't stop to clean it up. I had a demolition to schedule. I climbed the stairs to the second floor and stopped at the end of the hall. This was Gavin's sanctuary. He called it his home office. He had installed a biometric fingerprint lock on the solid oak door 3 months ago. He told Nia it was to protect sensitive client data. I knew better. A man who doesn't have a job doesn't have clients. He was hiding something. I didn't have his fingerprint, but I had something far more effective. I had a contact list full of men who knew how to tear things apart. I called Red. He was an old friend from my days in commercial framing, a man with forearms like tree trunks and a silence that was worth gold. He arrived in 20 minutes carrying a heavy canvas tool bag. He didn't ask why I was breaking into a room in my own house. He just looked at the fancy digital lock and let out a low grunt. "High-tech trash," he muttered. He pulled out a heavy-duty drill and a crowbar. He didn't finesse it. He drilled straight through the cylinder with a screech of metal on metal that sounded like music to my ears. Then he jammed the crowbar into the jamb and leaned his weight into it. The wood splintered. The door swung open with a groan. I handed Red a $100 bill. He tipped his cap and walked away. That is the difference between men like us and men like Gavin. We do the work. We don't make excuses. I stepped into the room. It was a disaster. Papers were scattered everywhere like fallen leaves. Empty energy drink cans lined the windowsill. A monitor displayed a paused video game. This was where he spent his days while I thought he was looking for work. I ignored the mess and went straight for the closet. Behind a stack of shoeboxes, I found what I was looking for. A small fireproof safe. I didn't need a drill for this one. Gavin was a simpleton. He used the same code for everything. His birthday, 1988. The keypad beeped a cheerful acceptance and the heavy door clicked open. I pulled the handle and the door swung wide, revealing the rot at the center of my family. It wasn't stacks of cash, it was stacks of paper. I pulled them out and laid them on the desk, smoothing them out with my calloused hands. The first layer was receipts, gambling receipts, the golden nugget, Harrah's. The dates went back 3 years, $5,000 lost on a Tuesday, $12,000 lost on a weekend trip he claimed was a networking conference. He wasn't just incompetent, he was a degenerate gambler, but that was just the surface. Beneath the gambling slips were letters, handwritten notes on dirty paper. They were short and brutal. "Pay what you owe Gavin or we come to the house. We know where your wife sleeps." They were signed by a man named Marcus. My son-in-law had brought loan sharks to my doorstep. I dug deeper to the bottom of the stack. And there it was, the document that made my blood run cold. It was a loan agreement, a home equity line of credit, $400,000 taken out against the value of my house. I flipped to the signature page. There in black ink was the name Moses Carter. It was a forgery. The loops were too wide. The slant was wrong, but it was good enough to fool a predatory lender who didn't care about details. I looked at the date on the document. It was signed 6 months ago. And then I saw the red stamp on the paper beneath it. Notice of default. Intent to foreclose. They hadn't made a single payment on the loan Gavin stole. The bank was coming. In 30 days, this house wouldn't be mine. It wouldn't be theirs. It would be an asset on a bank's balance sheet. I stood there in the silence of the room, surrounded by the evidence of my own destruction. A lesser man might have collapsed. A man who hadn't spent 50 years fighting for every inch of ground he owned might have wept. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The shock washed over me and receded, leaving behind a clarity as sharp as a diamond cutter. I looked at my hands. These hands had poured the foundation of this house. These hands had framed the walls. These hands had paid for every brick and every shingle. And Gavin thought he could sign it away with a shaky pen and a gambling addiction. He was a parasite, a tick that had burrowed so deep into my life that pulling him out would tear flesh. But I was ready to bleed if it meant getting him out. I took out my phone. My hand was steady as a rock. I began to photograph everything. I took clear, high-resolution pictures of the gambling markers. I photographed the threatening letters from Marcus. I took multiple shots of the forged mortgage document, focusing on the fake signature and the notary stamp. I photographed the foreclosure notice with the date clearly visible. I was building a dossier. I was mixing the mortar for a wall he would never climb over. I realized then that this wasn't just about kicking him out. This was about survival. If I didn't act now, I would be homeless at 71. I would be the burden they accused me of being. I gathered the papers and put them back into the safe exactly as I found them. I locked it. I wanted him to think he was still safe. I wanted him to think the old man was just watering the lawn. I walked out of the room and pulled the broken door shut. The lock was destroyed, but the real security had been breached long ago. I walked downstairs to the kitchen and picked up the landline. I dialed a number I had memorized 15 years ago. It was the direct line to Reynolds and Associates, the best real estate attorney in the state. A woman answered. "Mr. Reynolds' office, I need to speak to him," I said. "Tell him Moses Carter is coming in. Tell him to clear his schedule. I am coming to buy a debt, and I am bringing the war with me." I walked into the glass tower of Reynolds and Associates wearing my best Sunday suit. It was 10 years old, but the fabric was wool, and the cut was timeless. The receptionist looked at my scuffed work boots and opened her mouth to tell me deliveries were in the back. Before she could speak, Reynolds himself stepped out of the elevator. He was a man who charged $600 an hour, and he walked straight past a man in an Italian suit to shake my hand. "Good to see you, Moses," he said loud enough for the lobby to hear. "Come on back." We sat in his corner office overlooking the city skyline I had helped build. I placed the photos of the forged documents and the foreclosure notice on his mahogany desk. Reynolds studied them in silence. His face tightened. "This is a mess, Moses," he said. "We can file a police report for the forgery. We can tie this up in court for years to stop the foreclosure." I shook my head. "I do not want to stop it, Reynolds. I want to control it." I leaned forward. 15 years ago, when I sold Carter Construction to that multinational conglomerate for $12 million, I put the bulk of it into a blind trust. You set it up for me. Reynolds nodded slowly, remembering. "I did. It has been sitting there accruing interest. You never touched a dime. You told everyone you retired on a small pension." "I did that to protect my daughter from becoming exactly what she is today," I said. "But that protection failed. Now I need to use that hammer. I want to buy the note." Reynolds looked at me, his eyes widening. "You want to buy the mortgage debt from the bank?" "Exactly," I said. "The loan is in default. The bank wants to offload a toxic asset. I have the capital. Make them an offer for the full outstanding balance plus fees. Cash. Today. I want the deed transferring the lien to the Carter Trust. I want to be the one holding the paper when the 30 days are up." Reynolds leaned back in his leather chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. He understood. If I bought the note, I wasn't just saving the house. I was becoming the bank. I would have the legal right to evict anyone living in my property. "It is aggressive, Moses," he warned. "It is nuclear. If you do this, there is no going back to Sunday dinners." "There haven't been Sunday dinners in years, Reynolds," I said. "Just feeding times at the zoo. Draw up the papers. Buy the debt. I want to own my enemies." I walked out of the office feeling lighter than I had in years. The air conditioning in the building was cold, but the fire in my belly kept me warm. I had just authorized the transfer of nearly $500,000, and my pulse hadn't even jumped. I was a general moving troops. My phone began to ring in my pocket. It was a ringtone I had assigned to Nia years ago, a cheerful little chime that now sounded like a warning siren. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number with a Hawaiian area code. I answered. "Daddy, is that you?" Her voice was a high-pitched wail, shrill and panicked. I stopped walking and stood on the busy sidewalk, letting the city noise wash over me. "I am here, Nia," I said. "Daddy, you have to help me," she sobbed. "It is a nightmare. Gavin left me. He took the last of the cash we had and went to a bar. I am at the hostel, but they are kicking me out because I cannot pay for another night. I am on the street, Daddy. It is hot and I am hungry and I am scared. Please, Daddy, I need you." She was playing the victim. It was a role she had perfected since she was a teenager. Whenever she broke something, whenever she failed a class, whenever she spent too much money, she would call me with that same trembling voice. And every time for 30 years I had fixed it. I had opened my wallet, I had smoothed the road. I closed my eyes and pictured her standing in the garage watching Gavin toss my clothes into trash bags. She hadn't cried then. She hadn't been scared then. She had been cold. "Why are you calling me, Nia?" I asked. "I need a flight home," she cried. I checked the prices. "A one-way ticket is $5,000 for a last-minute booking. Please transfer it to my account. I can get a flight out tonight. I promise I will pay you back. I will do anything. Just get me off this island." $5,000. She asked for it as if it were $5 for lunch. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask where I was sleeping. She just assumed the Bank of Dad was open for business. I looked at my reflection in the glass of a shop window. I saw an old man with gray hair in a suit that was slightly too big. But I also saw a man who was done being a doormat. I thought about the last birthday gift I had given her. It was 6 months ago. She had demanded a specific handbag, a Hermes Birkin. I had to call in favors to get it. It cost $12,000. It was an obscene amount of money for a bag to carry lipstick and keys, but I bought it because I wanted her to smile at me. I wanted her to love me. She had taken it, said thanks, and put it in her closet. "You have $5,000, Nia," I said, my voice flat. "What do you mean?" she sniffled. "I have $0, Daddy." Gavin took it all. "No," I said. "You have a handbag, the orange one, the Hermes. You brought it with you, didn't you? I saw you dragging it to the car." There was a silence on the line, a stunned, heavy silence. "Yes," she whispered, "but that is my bag. It is an investment." "Then liquidate your asset," I said. "Go to a pawn shop, go to a consignment store, sell it to a tourist. That bag is worth more than a plane ticket. Sell it and fly coach." "But Daddy," she screamed, her voice losing the victim act and finding the entitlement underneath. "You can't be serious. That is my bag. You gave it to me. You can't make me sell my things. I am your daughter. You are supposed to help me." "I helped you for 32 years, Nia," I said. "I helped you right up until the moment you decided I was a burden. Burdens don't pay for first-class tickets. Burdens don't wire $5,000. Burdens hang up the phone." "Daddy, wait!" she shrieked. "Don't you dare hang up on me. I am stranded." I pressed the red button. The line went dead. I put the phone back in my pocket. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, the ache of cutting off a limb to save the body. But as I walked toward the train station to go back to the house I didn't own yet, I knew I had done the right thing. She would sell the bag, or she wouldn't. It was no longer my problem. I had a foreclosure to finalize. It took them 48 hours to crawl back from paradise. They did not arrive in a luxury black car this time. They arrived in a yellow taxi with a rattling muffler that idled loudly at the curb. I watched from the shadows of the porch as the driver popped the trunk. He didn't get out to help them. Gavin had to drag the heavy suitcases out himself. He looked like a man who had been chewed up and spit out by the world. His floral shirt was stained with sweat and something that looked like mustard. His straw hat was crushed. He hadn't shaved in 2 days and his eyes were rimmed with red. Nia looked even worse. She was wearing a tracksuit that she must have bought at an airport gift shop. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the dark circles of exhaustion. The Hermes bag was gone. In its place, she clutched a plastic grocery sack. They walked up the driveway, dragging their feet. The wheels of the suitcases clicked rhythmically against the concrete cracks I had sealed myself years ago. They didn't speak to each other. They just marched toward the front door with the grim determination of soldiers returning from a lost war. They thought the nightmare was over. They thought they could walk inside, take a hot shower, and sleep for a week in the climate-controlled comfort of the master suite. They thought they could scream at me later. They didn't notice me sitting in the wicker chair in the corner of the porch. They didn't notice the new brass deadbolt gleaming on the front door. They just wanted to be inside. Gavin stepped up to the door and jammed his key into the lock. He tried to turn it. It didn't budge. He frowned and jiggled it violently. He pulled it out, wiped it on his dirty shirt, and jammed it back in. He turned it so hard I thought the metal would snap. "Open, you piece of junk," he muttered. He kicked the bottom of the door, leaving a scuff mark on the white paint. "Why is this not working?" Nia dropped her suitcase with a thud. "Just open the door, Gavin. I need to use the bathroom." "I am trying, Nia," he snapped. "The key won't turn." Maybe the humidity warped the frame. He threw his shoulder against the wood, trying to force it. The door held firm. It was solid oak, reinforced with a steel frame. I should know. I installed it to keep burglars out. Now it was keeping the parasites out. "That is far enough, Gavin," I said. My voice was low and gravelly, cutting through the humid afternoon air. They both spun around. Gavin jumped back, nearly tripping over a suitcase. I was sitting in the shadows, sipping a glass of iced tea. Next to me, sitting perfectly still with ears perked and eyes locked on Gavin's throat, was a 110-pound Rottweiler named Titan. I had hired him and his handler from a private security firm an hour ago. The handler was standing just inside the hallway, but Titan was on a long lead attached to the porch railing. Moses Gavin shouted, his shock turning instantly into rage. "What are you doing on the porch? Why is the door locked? And whose dog is that? Get that beast away from me." He took a step toward me, his fists clenched. Titan let out a low rumble. It wasn't a bark. It was the sound of tectonic plates shifting. It was a warning that vibrated in your chest. Gavin froze. "Open the door, old man," he demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I am tired, I am hungry, and I am done with your games. Give me the new key. You have 5 seconds before I kick this door down and call the cops on you for locking me out of my own house." I set my iced tea down on the side table. The condensation left a wet ring on the glass. I picked up a manila envelope that had been resting on my lap. I stood up slowly. My knees popped, but I stood tall. Titan stood with me, his muscles tensing under his black and tan coat. "It is not your house, Gavin," I said. "Not anymore." I tossed the envelope at his feet. It landed with a heavy slap on the porch decking. Gavin looked at it, then at me. He didn't pick it up. "What is this?" he sneered. "Another chore list." "It is a notice of seizure," I said. I walked to the edge of the porch railing, looking down at them. "You defaulted on your mortgage, Gavin. You haven't made a payment in 6 months. You ignored the letters. You ignored the calls. You thought you could gamble away the equity and hide the notices in your safe. Well, the bank got tired of waiting. They sold the debt." Gavin's face went white. The bluster drained out of him, leaving only the fear of a man who knows he has been caught. "That is impossible," he stammered. "I have 30 days. The notice said 30 days. The bank sold the note this morning," I said. "I bought it. I used the money from the Carter Trust, the money you didn't know existed. I own the debt, Gavin. And as the lien holder in possession of a property in default, I have exercised my right to secure the asset." Naya stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, please stop. We live here. You can't just lock us out. This is our home." I looked at her. I looked at the plastic bag in her hand. "It is not your home, Nia," I said. "It is a collateral asset. And you are trespassing." I pointed to the line where the concrete driveway met the porch steps. "That line right there, that is the boundary. Anyone who crosses that line without my permission is intruders. I have already filed the eviction notice with the county clerk. You have 24 hours to collect your personal effects under police supervision. Until then, you are not welcome on this property." Gavin looked at the door, then at the dog, then at me. He looked like he was going to vomit. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I just did." I said, "Now get off my grass." Titan let out a sharp bark, snapping his jaws. Gavin flinched, stumbling backward off the step. He grabbed his suitcase and retreated to the sidewalk. Naya followed him, sobbing. They stood on the public street, looking back at the house they had treated like a hotel. I sat back down and picked up my tea. It was going to be a quiet evening. I watched Gavin pacing back and forth on the sidewalk like a caged animal that had finally found a way to bite back. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket and dialed 3 digits with a dramatic flair that was entirely for my benefit. I sat perfectly still on the porch, my hands resting on my knees while Titan lay at my feet like a stone statue. I could hear every word Gavin said because he wanted me to hear. He wanted the neighbors to hear. He spoke loudly, his voice trembling with a manufactured fear that was almost impressive in its deceit. "Yes, I need police immediately," he shouted into the receiver, his eyes locking onto mine with a smug glint. "I am the homeowner at 452 Oakwood Drive. There is an intruder on my property. He has barricaded himself on my porch." He lowered his voice, then dropping it to a conspiratorial whisper that carried across the lawn like poison. "He is an African-American male in his 70s. He is aggressive. He has a weaponized dog. I fear for my wife's safety. Please hurry." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It was not fear. It was disgust. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was playing a card that had gotten men who looked like me killed for decades. He was counting on the bias. He was banking on the assumption that when the police arrived, they would see a white man in a polo shirt standing next to a crying blonde woman, and they would see a black man with a Rottweiler, and they would draw their conclusions before they even drew their breath. He was trying to swat me. He was trying to use the law as his personal hit squad. He smirked at me, snapping the phone shut. "You are done, old man," he sneered. "You think a piece of paper matters when the boys in blue show up. They are going to drag you off this porch in handcuffs. Maybe if you resist a little, they will teach you a lesson about respecting your betters." I said nothing. I just reached for the manila folder Reynolds had given me. I placed it on the small table next to my iced tea. I smoothed the cover. I waited. Nia stood behind Gavin, chewing on her fingernail, her eyes wide and wet. She knew this was wrong. She knew exactly who had paid for the very ground she was standing on. But she said nothing. Her silence was her signature. 10 minutes later, the air was split by the wail of sirens. They didn't come quietly. 2 cruisers screeched around the corner, tires biting into the asphalt, blue and red lights flashing against the twilight sky. They pulled up to the curb at sharp angles, blocking the driveway. Doors flew open. 4 officers spilled out. Their movements were sharp and practiced. Hands hovered over holsters. Tension radiated off them in waves. "Get back!" one officer shouted at Gavin, waving him toward the street. Gavin threw his hands up in the air, performing the role of the terrified victim to perfection. "Officers! Thank God," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He is crazy. He won't let us in. That dog is vicious. Please help us." The officers turned their attention to the porch. They saw a large black man. They saw a large black dog. The equation was simple in their minds. Threat. "Sir," the lead officer barked, his hand unclipping the retention strap on his service weapon. "Stand up slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them. Step away from the animal." The air was thick enough to choke on. I could see the adrenaline in the young officer's eyes. I could see the way his partner was flanking to the left, creating a line of fire. One wrong move, one sudden twitch, and this would end in blood. My blood. Gavin watched with bated breath, waiting for the violence he had orchestrated. I did not stand up. I did not step away. I moved with the slow, deliberate calm of a man who has nothing to hide. I placed my hands flat on the table, palms down. "Officer," I said, my voice projecting deep and steady over the distance. "My name is Moses Carter. This is my property. The dog is a licensed security animal under the control of a handler inside the door." "Do not move," the officer shouted again, stepping onto the grass. "I am not asking you again. Get on the ground." "I am not getting on the ground, son," I said, maintaining eye contact. "But I am going to slide this folder toward the edge of the table. Inside, you will find a court order signed by Judge Miller exactly 2 hours ago. It is a deed in lieu of foreclosure and an emergency order of protection against the 2 individuals standing on the sidewalk." The officer hesitated. He paused mid-step. He looked at Gavin, who was now bobbing his head, frantically mouthing that I was lying. Then he looked back at me. He saw an old man in a suit. He saw the stillness. He saw the confidence. "Cover me," he muttered to his partner. He holstered his weapon and walked up the driveway, his eyes never leaving Titan. He climbed the first 2 steps of the porch. I did not flinch. He reached out and took the folder. He flipped it open. He scanned the first page. He looked at the raised seal. He flipped to the second page. He read the bold text of the eviction notice. He looked at the date. He looked at the signature. The tension began to drain out of his posture. His shoulders dropped. He looked up at me, and for the first time he saw a citizen instead of a suspect. "This is legitimate?" he asked, tapping the paper. "Call the courthouse if you want," I said. Reynolds and Associates filed it. The clerk's number is on the second page. The officer closed the folder. He let out a long breath. He turned around and walked back down the steps. He walked past Titan without a second glance. He walked straight up to Gavin, who was now smiling, expecting to see me in cuffs. "Sir," the officer said, his voice hard and professional, stripped of all sympathy, "you need to grab your things and leave." "What?" Gavin stammered, his smile vanishing. "What are you talking about? He is the intruder. Arrest him. This document says you have been evicted as of 5 p.m. today," the officer stated. "It says the bank foreclosed on the note and Mr. Carter purchased the debt. He is the legal owner. You are trespassing. And frankly, sir, filing a false police report about an aggressive intruder is a crime. I suggest you walk away before I decide to book you for wasting my time." Gavin's face went ashen. He looked from the officer to me. He realized the game was over. The racial bias hadn't worked. The lies hadn't worked. The law was a cold, hard wall, and he had just run face first into it. "But where are we supposed to go?" Nia wailed, her voice rising to a shriek. "We don't have anywhere. We don't have any money." "That is a civil matter, ma'am," the officer said, turning his back on them. "You need to vacate the premises. Now." The neighbors had come out of their houses, drawn by the lights. Mrs. Higgins from across the street was watching with her arms crossed. The young couple next door was filming on their phones. They saw everything. They saw the white man who tried to frame his father-in-law get told to take a hike. Gavin grabbed the handle of his suitcase. He yanked it so hard the bag tipped over. He cursed, kicking it upright. He started walking down the street, his head down, his shoulders hunched. He didn't look back. He just wanted to escape the eyes of the crowd. Naya stood there for a second longer, looking at me on the porch. She looked like she was waiting for me to break. She was waiting for her daddy to come save her from the big bad world. I took a sip of my tea. I didn't look at her. She let out a sob that sounded like a child's tantrum and grabbed her bag. She ran after Gavin, the plastic wheels of her suitcase clattering loudly on the pavement, echoing down the quiet suburban street. The officers got back in their cars and turned off the lights. Darkness returned to the neighborhood. I sat alone on my porch, the master of my domain, listening to the beautiful sound of silence. 3 days later, the digital assault began. My phone started vibrating on the kitchen counter, buzzing like an angry hornet. It was not a call, it was a relentless stream of notifications from the neighborhood Facebook group. I unlocked the screen and there it was, a post written by Gavin. He had typed out a masterpiece of fiction that would have made a screenwriter jealous. The headline read, "Heartbroken and homeless, helping our father through dementia." In 500 agonizing words, he painted himself and Naya as saints who had sacrificed everything to care for an abusive, confused old man. He claimed I had suffered a psychotic break. He claimed I had attacked them in a confused rage and thrown them out into the cold without coats or money. He even posted a photo of a bruise on Nia's arm. I knew that bruise. She got it bumping into a door frame while drunk on my wine 2 weeks ago. But the internet did not care about the truth. The comments were a landslide of hate. People who had never met me were calling for my arrest. They were calling Adult Protective Services. They were calling me a monster. They offered Gavin money. They offered them places to stay. They set up a GoFundMe page titled, "Help Gavin and Naya Rebuild After Tragedy." It raised $5,000 in 2 hours. I sat at my table reading the lies. Most men would have been furious. Most men would have logged on and started typing in all caps, trying to defend themselves in the comment section. I did not type a single word. I just took a screenshot. I saved the URL. I printed the page. Gavin thought he was winning the court of public opinion. He did not realize that in a court of law, libel is expensive. He had just handed me the ammunition to bankrupt him twice over. The next morning I woke up to a dull thud against the front window. Then another. Splat! I walked to the living room and pulled back the curtain. Yellow yolk streamed down the glass. A group of teenagers was riding away on bicycles laughing. Someone had egged my house. I walked out to the porch to inspect the damage. Mrs. Higgins from across the street was watering her petunias. Usually she waved. Today she turned her back on me, her posture stiff with judgment. A car drove slowly past and the driver rolled down the window to spit on my driveway. I stood there in my robe watching the saliva hit the concrete. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. They thought this would break me. They thought shame would make me crumble. They did not know my history. I closed my eyes and went back to 1985. I was a black man trying to start a construction business in a county that did not want me there. I had bricks thrown through the windshield of my truck. I had tires slashed. I had men spit in my face and tear up my contracts. I stood tall then, and I built an empire out of their doubt. A few eggs and some dirty looks from suburban neighbors were nothing. They were mosquitoes buzzing around a lion. I did not wipe the egg off the window. I left it there. It was evidence. I walked back inside and went to the security room. I had installed a new system the day I bought the debt. High-definition cameras with audio recording covering every inch of the property, interior and exterior. I sat down at the monitor. I rewound the footage to 3 days ago. To the night they came back from the airport. I found the clip. I downloaded it. I saved it to a thumb drive. Then I put on my suit. It was time to visit Reynolds again. I sat in the conference room at Reynolds and Associates while the large screen on the wall played the video. Reynolds sat with his arms crossed, his face grim. The video showed the living room from a high angle. The timestamp was 3 weeks ago. It showed Gavin stumbling in drunk at 2 a.m. It showed him kicking my dog's water bowl across the room. It showed him screaming at Nia, calling her useless because she hadn't asked me for more money yet. It showed Nia throwing a vase at his head and screaming that she wished the old man would just die so they could get the cash. It showed Gavin laughing and saying, "We just have to wait him out, babe, he is losing it anyway." Then Reynolds played the second clip, the one from the porch 3 days ago. It showed Gavin threatening me. It showed him lying to the police. It showed him perfectly sober, and perfectly malicious. Reynolds stopped the video. "This is nuclear Moses," he said. "If we release this, we destroy their reputation forever. Gavin will never get a job in this town. Nia will be a pariah." "Do it," I said. "Release it. Not on my page. Have your firm release it as a rebuttal to the libelous claims made against your client. Attach the police report from the eviction." Reynolds nodded. He typed a brief statement. He attached the video files. He hit enter. Within an hour, the tide turned. The internet is a fickle beast. It loves a victim, but it loves the exposed liar even more. The comments on Gavin's post stopped. Then they were deleted. Then the GoFundMe was flagged for fraud and taken down. My phone started buzzing again. But this time it wasn't hate mail. It was apologies. It was neighbors saying they had no idea. It was people tagging Gavin and calling him a con artist. I watched the view count on the video climb. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. Gavin had wanted attention. He had wanted to be the star of the show. Now he was. I sat in my quiet house and watched the egg yolk dry on the window. I didn't need to clean it yet. The rain would come eventually. It always does. A silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway looking like a spaceship landing in a cornfield. Out stepped Preston and Sylvia Miller. They were Gavin's parents. They wore white linen suits and expressions that smelled like old money and condescension. I watched them walk up the path, avoiding the cracks in the concrete as if poverty were a contagious disease. I opened the door before they knocked. Preston didn't offer his hand. He just walked past me into the living room with Sylvia trailing behind him, clutching her pearls like I was going to snatch them. They refused to sit on my furniture. They stood in the center of the room looking at the water stains on the ceiling I was fixing to repair. Mr. Carter Preston began, his voice dripping with that fake politeness rich folks use when talking to the help. "We are here to resolve this unfortunate situation. Gavin tells us you are having some financial difficulties and mental health episodes. We want to help." He pulled a checkbook from his jacket pocket. It was a power move. He thought he could wave a pen and make the problem disappear. "We have found a lovely assisted living facility in the next county," Sylvia chimed in. "It is very clean. We are willing to pay for your first 6 months and buy this house from you for, let us say, $100,000. It is a generous offer considering the condition of the neighborhood. $100,000. The house was worth 5 times that. They weren't here to help. They were here to erase me. They wanted to pack me off to a home and hand the deed to their failure of a son so he could pretend he was a man again." I looked at the checkbook. I looked at their sneering faces. They thought I was a broke old black man who would be grateful for their scraps. They had no idea they were standing in the living room of a man who could buy and sell their country club membership without blinking. "Keep your pen in your pocket, Preston," I said. My voice was low and dangerous. Preston laughed. It was a short bark of disbelief. "Do not be difficult, Moses," he said. "You have no leverage here. Gavin is a vice president at Miller Industries. He has resources. You have a foreclosure notice and a bad reputation. Take the money." I walked over to the side table where I kept the files I had retrieved from Gavin's safe. I picked up a blue folder. It wasn't the foreclosure papers. It was something much more interesting. I opened it and pulled out a stack of spreadsheets I had analyzed with my forensic accountant just yesterday. "You are right," I said. "Gavin is a vice president, which gave him access to the corporate accounts, didn't it?" I handed the papers to Preston. He frowned and took them. He adjusted his glasses. I watched his face change. It went from arrogance to confusion to absolute horror in 10 seconds flat. "What is this?" he whispered. "It is a ledger of unauthorized transfers from Miller Industries to an offshore shell company called G Prime," I explained. $200,000 in May, $150,000 in June, $300,000 last month. He didn't earn that money, Preston. He stole it. He embezzled from his own father to pay his gambling debts. You thought he was successful. You thought he was a businessman. He is a thief who has been bleeding your company dry to play poker." Sylvia grabbed the papers from her husband's shaking hands. She gasped. "This is his signature," she cried. "These are the accounts he manages." I stepped closer to them. I wasn't the poor old man anymore. I was the prosecutor. "He stole from me," I said. "He forged my signature on a mortgage to pay off a shark. When that wasn't enough, he started stealing from you. You came here to buy me off with pennies while your son was robbing you of millions. You called me a charity case. Look at those numbers and tell me who the real beggar is." Preston dropped the papers. They scattered on the floor like dead leaves. His face turned a shade of purple that looked dangerous. He didn't look at me anymore. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely dial. He put the phone to his ear. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little parasite," he roared when the line connected. "I am at Moses Carter's house. I am looking at the G-Prime transfers. Do not lie to me. Shut up. Shut your mouth. You are done. You hear me. You are fired. I am freezing your trust fund. I am calling the board. If you come near the office, I will have security throw you out. You are cut off." He hung up the phone and stood there breathing heavily. The silence in the room was heavy. The arrogance was gone. They looked old and tired and defeated. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't apologize for insulting me. They just turned around and walked out the door, leaving the evidence of their son's crimes on my floor. They got into their silver Mercedes and drove away. They had come to bury me. Instead, they had just buried their son. I picked up the papers and put them back in the folder. One enemy down, 2 to go. The rain came down in sheets, hammering against the metal roof of the porch like 1,000 tiny fists. It was a Tuesday night, and the house felt emptier than usual. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the storm. Then came a sound I had not expected, a weak, frantic knocking on the front door. I walked to the entryway and peered through the peephole. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. It was Nia. She was alone. She was not wearing her designer clothes or her haughty expression. She was soaking wet, her hair plastered to her skull, shivering violently in a thin cardigan that offered no protection against the Georgia downpour. She looked like a lost child. She looked like the little girl who used to run to me when thunder shook the house. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. She stumbled inside, dripping water onto the hardwood floor. She did not look at me with defiance. She looked up with eyes red from crying. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I have nowhere else to go." Gavin kicked me out of the motel room. He is drinking again. I am scared. I stood there, my heart a fortress with the drawbridge raised. I wanted to tell her to leave. I wanted to remind her of the eviction notice, but then she dropped to her knees and clutched my hand, pressing it against her stomach. "Daddy, please," she sobbed. "Not for me, for the baby. I am pregnant." The world stopped. The sound of the rain faded into a dull hum. Pregnant. A grandchild. Etta and I had dreamed of a house full of grandchildren running through the halls, filling the empty spaces with life. We had even built a nursery in the East Wing years ago, a room that had gathered dust for a decade. I looked down at my daughter. She looked frail. She looked terrified. The armor I had built around my heart developed a hairline fracture. I looked at her stomach. There was nothing to see yet but the idea of it. The promise of a new life, of my bloodline continuing, was a powerful drug. It hit me harder than any apology. It hit me right in the gut where a father is weakest. I looked at her wet face, and for the first time in weeks, I did not see a parasite. I saw a mother. I saw a future that might be worth saving. "Get up, Nia," I said, my voice rough. "You are shivering." I helped her to her feet. I did not hug her, but I did not push her away. "Go to the guest bathroom. There are dry towels. I will find you some clothes." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us." I went to the kitchen and turned on the stove. I pulled a can of tomato soup from the pantry. It was simple food, comfort food. The kind I used to make her when she had the flu in the 3rd grade. I buttered 2 slices of bread and placed them in the cast-iron skillet, listening to the sizzle. The smell of toasted bread and warm soup filled the kitchen, chasing away the smell of rain and misery. For a few minutes, I let myself believe. I let myself imagine a baby sleeping in the nursery. I let myself think that maybe this was the turning point. Maybe hitting rock bottom had woken her up. Maybe a child would make her grow up. I was an old man and I was tired of war. I wanted peace. I wanted a legacy that wasn't just a bank account and a paid-off mortgage. I placed the bowl on a tray. I cut the sandwich into triangles just the way she liked it. I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt since the birthday dinner. It was hope. And it was dangerous. Nia came into the kitchen wearing one of my old flannel shirts. She looked small and vulnerable. She sat at the table and ate ravenously, her hands shaking slightly. I sat opposite her, watching her eat. I didn't say anything about Gavin. I didn't say anything about the money. I just watched my daughter eat and thought about the crib I could build in the workshop. Eat up, I said softly. You are eating for two now. She smiled at me, a weak, grateful smile. I need to use the restroom again, Daddy, she said, standing up. Morning sickness, or evening sickness, I guess. She walked down the hall to the powder room. I stood up to clear the table. I walked toward the sink but stopped when I heard a voice. It was coming from down the hall. The powder room door was old wood and the latch didn't catch properly if you didn't push it hard. It was slightly ajar. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But the tone of her voice stopped me dead in my tracks. It wasn't the weak, trembling voice of a scared pregnant girl. It was sharp. It was hushed. It was the voice of a con artist closing a deal. Relax, Gavin, she hissed. I am inside. I am in the kitchen. The old man bought it hook, line, and sinker. He is literally making me soup right now. It is pathetic. He heard the word baby and his eyes glazed over. I stepped closer, my socks silent on the floorboards. My heart, which had just started to beat again, turned into a block of ice. Yes, I am sure, she whispered. I showed him the test I bought online, the prank one that always turns positive. It cost $20 and it just got us back into $1 million house. Stop crying about your parents cutting you off. We don't need them. We have Moses wrapped around my little finger. I will play the sick, pregnant daughter for a few weeks. I will get him to sign over temporary guardianship so I can manage the stress. Once we are back on the deed, we can figure out the rest. Just stay at the motel tonight. I will let you in tomorrow when he goes to the hardware store. He is already planning to build a crib. Can you believe it? Senile old fool. Senile old fool. The words hung in the air, vibrating with malice. I stood there in the hallway holding the tray with the empty soup bowl. The hope I had felt 5 minutes ago curdled into a rage so pure it felt like white heat. They weren't just stealing my money, they were weaponizing my dead wife's dream. They were using a non-existent child to break into my heart so they could rob me blind. It was a violation worse than any forged check. It was a violation of the soul. I walked back to the kitchen. I set the tray down on the counter. I picked up the bowl. It was heavy ceramic. I waited. I stood by the back door, my hand on the knob. Nia walked back into the room. She had fixed her hair. She put the sad face back on. Daddy? She said, touching her stomach. I feel a little better. The soup was delicious. I looked at her. I looked at her stomach. There was no life there, only lies. I picked up the bowl and hurled it at the wall next to her head. It shattered with a violent crash, sending shards of ceramic flying across the floor. Nia screamed, jumping back, her mask of vulnerability slipping instantly. Daddy, what are you doing? She shrieked. Get out, I said. My voice was not a shout. It was a growl from the bottom of a grave. Get out of my house. Daddy, you are scaring me, she cried, backing away. What happened? I am pregnant. You can't stop it, I roared, stepping toward her. Stop the act. I heard you. I heard you on the phone. The prank test. The $20. The senile old fool. Her face went pale. The color drained away, leaving her looking like a ghost. Daddy, I can explain. There is nothing to explain, I said. You are not pregnant. You are a monster. You used the one thing you knew I wanted more than anything to trick me. You played on my grief for your mother. You are rot. Nia, you are rot in the foundation of this family. I grabbed her by the arm. The flannel shirt bunched in my fist. I dragged her toward the back door. She screamed, kicking and scratching, trying to dig her heels into the floor. Daddy, please, it is raining. I have nowhere to go. You should have thought about that before you decided to play God, I said. I opened the back door. The wind howled, pushing rain into the kitchen. I shoved her out. She stumbled on the wet steps and fell into the mud. She looked up at me, rain plastering her hair to her face again, mud staining her knees. This time there was no pity in my heart, only disgusted resolve. Don't come back, I said. If you step foot on this property again, I will call the police and I will have you arrested for trespassing and attempted fraud. Tell Gavin his plan worked. It proved to me that I have no daughter. I slammed the door and locked it. I engaged the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood, breathing heavily. I was alone again. The house was quiet except for the storm outside. I walked to the sink and washed my hands, scrubbing them until the skin was raw, trying to wash away the feeling of her arm. I had almost let the enemy back in. I had almost lost the war because I wanted to be a grandfather. Never again. I went to the cupboard and took out a bottle of whiskey. I poured a glass. Tomorrow I would go to court. Tomorrow I would make sure they never got close enough to hurt me again. The court summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who refused to look me in the eye. It was a heavy envelope thick with legal jargon and betrayal. Emergency petition for temporary guardianship. The plaintiffs were Gavin Miller and Nia Carter. The defendant was Moses Carter. They were claiming I was mentally incompetent. They were asking a judge to strip me of my rights, to seize control of my assets, and to place me in a state-run facility for my own protection. They wanted to bury me alive. I stood in the hallway of the courthouse wearing my best suit, the wool scratching against my neck. Reynolds stood beside me, his briefcase looking like a weapon. We walked into the courtroom, and there they were. Gavin and Nia sat at the plaintiff's table holding hands. They were dressed in somber colors. Nia wore no makeup, looking pale and fragile. A dutiful daughter burdened by a tragedy. Gavin wore an ill-fitting suit. His shoulders slumped, trying to project the image of a humble man carrying a heavy load. They did not look at me. They looked at the judge with wide, pleading eyes. Judge Holloway was a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose. She read the petition in silence. Mr. Sterling, the lawyer Gavin had hired with money he likely borrowed from a loan shark, stood up. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with synthetic concern. "This is not a step my clients take lightly. They love Mr. Carter deeply. However, his behavior has become increasingly erratic and dangerous. He has exhibited signs of profound dementia, violent outbursts, and an inability to care for his own basic needs. He is a danger to himself and others. We are simply asking for the legal authority to ensure he receives the care he deserves." I sat there stone-faced. My hands were folded on the table. Inside, I was screaming. I wanted to stand up and tell them I could recite the building codes for the entire county from memory. I wanted to tell them I had managed million-dollar payrolls while Gavin was still learning to tie his shoes. But Reynolds placed a hand on my arm. "Wait," he whispered. "Let them dig the hole." Sterling called his first witness. It was a man named Kyle. I recognized him. He was one of Gavin's drinking buddies, a man who had spent more time on my couch than at a job. Kyle sat in the witness box and lied with the ease of a man who has done it before. "Yes, sir," he told Sterling, looking earnestly at the judge. "I have seen Mr. Carter wandering the neighborhood in his pajamas at noon. He looked confused. He did not know where he lived. I had to guide him back to his porch. He was shouting at a mailbox, thinking it was his brother. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. I have never wandered anywhere in my pajamas. I am up at 5 every morning, showered and dressed before the sun touches the grass." Then came a woman I did not know, another friend of theirs. She claimed I had left the gas stove on for hours, endangering the whole block. She claimed I forgot her name 5 minutes after meeting her. Gavin sat there nodding his head, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. "See, Judge," his posture said, "it is so hard for us. We are the victims here. It was a coordinated attack. They were building a narrative of decline brick by brick, using lies as mortar." The judge looked at me. She saw an old black man sitting silently. She saw what they wanted her to see, a relic, a man past his prime who needed to be managed. Sterling rested his case. "Your Honor," he said, "the evidence is clear. Mr. Carter is suffering from advanced cognitive decline. For his safety and the preservation of his remaining estate, guardianship must be granted to his daughter and son-in-law immediately." Reynolds stood up. He did not walk to the podium. He walked to the center of the room, commanding the space like a foreman on a job site. "Your Honor," he said, his voice booming off the mahogany walls, "before you rule on the mental state of my client, I would like to submit 2 pieces of evidence into the record. First is a comprehensive neurological and psychological evaluation conducted yesterday by Dr. Aris, the head of neurology at Emory University Hospital." Reynolds walked to the bench and handed the judge a thick file. She opened it. She scanned the summary. Reynolds continued. "As you can see, Dr. Aris found Mr. Carter's cognitive functions to be exemplary. In fact, he scored in the 99th percentile for men of his age. There is no dementia. There is no decline. There is only a man who is tired of being lied to." Gavin shifted in his seat. Nia looked down at her lap, picking at a loose thread on her skirt. "But, Your Honor," Reynolds said, turning to look directly at Gavin. The plaintiffs claim Mr. Carter's behavior has been erratic. They claim he sleeps all day and is confused. They claim he forgets things. We have an explanation for that. Reynolds reached into his pocket and pulled out a USB drive. He plugged it into the court's presentation system. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. The courtroom darkened. The video showed my kitchen. The timestamp was 4 weeks ago. It was high-definition footage, clear and sharp. I was sitting at the table reading the newspaper. I got up and left the room. A moment later, Gavin walked into the frame. He looked over his shoulder to make sure the coast was clear. He opened the refrigerator and took out the glass pitcher of iced tea I brewed every morning. He pulled a small orange prescription bottle from his pocket. He crushed something in his hand and dumped a white powder into the tea. He stirred it with a wooden spoon, wiped the spoon on his pants, and put the pitcher back. He walked away whistling. The courtroom was silent, dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector. Gavin turned the color of old milk. Reynolds paused the video on Gavin's face. "Your Honor," Reynolds said, his voice cold as steel. "We managed to retrieve the pitcher before it was washed. We had the residue analyzed. It was crushed benzodiazepines and heavy sedatives. Mr. Carter wasn't sleeping because he was senile. He was sleeping because his son-in-law was drugging him to keep him docile while he stole his money and forged his signature. I installed those cameras 6 months ago because I am a builder, and builders know when the foundation is rotting." The judge looked at the screen. Then she looked at Gavin. Her face went hard, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You have 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't have the bailiff arrest you right now for assault and perjury." Gavin stood up, knocking his chair over. "It is out of context," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It was just vitamins. He needs vitamins. He is old." "Sit down," the judge roared. She slammed her gavel so hard I felt the vibration in my teeth. Petition denied with prejudice. "And Mr. Miller, I am forwarding this evidence and the transcript of this hearing to the district attorney's office. If you ever step foot in my courtroom again, it better be as a defendant in handcuffs. Get out of my sight, both of you." Gavin looked at Naya. She refused to look at him. They scrambled to collect their papers, their dignity left in a puddle on the floor. They ran out of the courtroom like rats fleeing a sinking ship. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I nodded to the judge. She nodded back, a look of respect in her eyes. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. I took a deep breath of fresh air. They had tried to take my mind. Instead, they had just lost their freedom. Gavin was a rat trapped in a corner, and rats bite when they are scared. The judge had thrown out his guardianship petition with prejudice. The bank accounts were frozen solid. His parents had cut him off and threatened to call security if he stepped foot in the family business. He had one card left to play, and it was a card stained with violence. He went to see Marcus. Marcus was the kind of man civilized society pretended did not exist. He ran a payday loan operation out of the back of a pawn shop in the gritty part of Decatur. He collected debts with a baseball bat and a smile that showed too many gold teeth. Gavin owed him money, a lot of money, but Gavin thought he could trade a debt for a favor. He met Marcus in the alley behind the shop where the air smelled of garbage and ozone. He told him about the house. He told him about the stubborn old man who wouldn't sign the papers. He lied, of course. He told Marcus I was a squatter who had tricked his wife. He told him I was stealing his inheritance. He offered Marcus a cut, 10% of the sale price, if he could just convince the old man to sign the deed. "Just scare him," Gavin said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and malice. "Break a few windows, maybe break a few fingers. Make him afraid to close his eyes at night." Marcus listened, leaning against the brick wall, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. He looked at Gavin's soft hands and his desperate eyes. He agreed. He needed his money, and if scaring an old man was the way to get it, he would do the job. Gavin left that alley thinking he had hired a hitman. He did not know he had just sent a wolf to meet a bear. It was 2 a.m. when the glass in the back door shattered. I was awake. I am always awake these days. I sat in my armchair in the dark, listening to the sound of heavy boots crunching on the broken glass. Titan let out a low, guttural growl, his hackles raised, but I signaled him to stay. This was my fight. I picked up my old Remington 870 shotgun. It was rusted in places and the stock was scratched, but the action was smooth as butter. I pumped a shell into the chamber. The sound was unmistakable. CHK, CHK. It echoed through the silent house like a thunderclap demanding attention. The footsteps stopped instantly. I walked into the kitchen. the shotgun leveled at chest height, my finger resting on the trigger guard. A shadow stood by the refrigerator. He was huge, a giant of a man in a leather jacket that creaked when he moved. He held a crowbar in his hand like a toy. "Don't move, son," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You took a wrong turn." The man turned slowly, raising his hands. The moonlight from the window hit his face. I looked at him. He looked at me. He looked at the shotgun. Then his eyes drifted to the framed photo on the wall behind me. It was a black and white picture of me and my crew from 1995 standing in front of the community center we built for free in the ward. The man's eyes went wide. He squinted at me, tilting his head. "Mr. Carter?" he asked, his voice rough with confusion. "Moses Carter." I kept the gun steady. "That is my name. Who are you, and why should I not put a hole in your chest?" He lowered the crowbar. He let it clang to the floor. He took a step forward, ignoring the weapon pointed at his heart. "You don't remember me, do you? I am Marcus. Marcus King. My daddy was Jeremiah King. He was your foreman for 20 years. You paid for his funeral when the cancer took him. You paid for my first semester of trade school." I lowered the gun slowly. Jeremiah. I saw the resemblance now. The same square jaw, the same eyes. Jeremiah was the best man I ever hired. A man of honor who worked until he couldn't stand. And here was his son breaking into my house to break my legs. "Marcus," I said, "your daddy would whip you if he saw you now." Marcus looked at his boots. He looked ashamed. "I didn't know it was you, Mr. Carter," he said. "The guy said it was some squatter. He said you stole the house from his family." I put the safety on and leaned the shotgun against the counter. I went to the cabinet and pulled out 2 glasses and the bottle of bourbon I kept for special occasions. "Sit down, Marcus," I said, pointing to the table. "We have to talk." He sat at the kitchen table, the same table Nia had eaten soup at just weeks ago. He looked too big for the chair. I poured him a drink. He drank it in one swallow, wincing as it burned going down. Then he started talking. He told me everything. He told me how Gavin owed him $50,000 in gambling debts. He told me how Gavin had begged him to come here tonight. He told me the specific instructions Gavin had given him. "Break his hand so he can't hold a pen," Marcus said, looking at his empty glass. "Then put the pen in his hand and make him sign the quitclaim deed. Gavin is waiting in a car 2 blocks away, waiting for the techs to come in and collect the prize. He wanted to torture me into homelessness." I listened, and I felt a cold rage settle over me. It was a different kind of anger than before. This was final. Gavin wasn't just a thief, he was evil. But I also felt something else. Opportunity. Marcus was not just a thug. He was a man with a code, and he owed me a debt of honor that went back a generation. "Marcus," I said, pouring him another drink, "you want your money. I want my peace. I think we can help each other. Gavin thinks you work for him. Let us keep it that way. But from now on, you report to me." Marcus looked up, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was the smile of a wolf who just realized he was on the winning side. "What do you need me to do, Mr. Carter?" I leaned forward. "I need you to tell him I signed. I need you to tell him the job is done. And then I need you to tell me exactly what his next move is, because we are going to set a trap so deep he will never climb out of it." Marcus poured another drink while his hands large enough to crush a brick held the crystal glass with surprising delicacy. He looked at me over the rim, his eyes serious. "Mr. Carter, there is something else you need to know. Gavin didn't just hire me to break your hand." He showed me a binder in his car. He was bragging about his financial planning. He called it his retirement fund. "He took out a life insurance policy on you, Mr. Carter. A big one. $2 million with a double indemnity rider for accidental death. He forged your signature on the application 3 months ago. He is paying the premiums with the money he stole from his parents. He told me he expects the policy to pay out before Christmas." I sat there feeling the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was a death clock. Gavin had bet against my life. He had calculated the actuarial value of my breath and decided he could make a profit on my expiration. The house was just the appetizer. My life was the main course. I looked at Marcus. "Does he have a plan?" I asked, my voice steady despite the cold knot in my stomach. Marcus nodded slowly. He asked me if I knew anyone who could cut brake lines. He asked me how much it would cost to make a hit and run look like a drunk driving accident. I told him I didn't do that kind of work, but he is desperate, Mr. Carter. And desperate men find willing hands. The next morning, I went to the hardware store because I needed lag bolts to reinforce the back door. I walked down Main Street, the sun shining on the pavement, but I felt exposed. Every car that passed looked like a weapon. Every shadow looked like an assassin. I was waiting for the light to change at the corner of 4th and Elm. The street was quiet. Then I heard the roar of an engine accelerating. I turned my head. A dark sedan was barreling toward the intersection. It didn't slow down for the red light. It swerved. It jumped the curb straight toward me. I didn't think. Instinct took over. I threw myself to the right, diving behind a concrete planter. The car smashed into the metal pole where I had been standing a split second before. Sparks flew. Metal shrieked. The car didn't stop. It reversed tires, squealing, smoking against the asphalt, and sped away down the avenue. I lay on the concrete, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. People were screaming. A woman ran over to help me up. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded, brushing the dust off my suit. I was physically fine, but mentally I had crossed a threshold. That wasn't a drunk driver. That was a message. Gavin wasn't waiting for nature to take its course. He was trying to cash his ticket. I looked at the dented pole. If I hadn't moved, that would be my spine. I realized then that a restraining order wouldn't stop him. The police couldn't watch me 24 hours a day. I had to make myself worthless to him. I had to make my death the most expensive thing that could ever happen to him. I went straight to Reynolds' office, and I didn't make an appointment. I walked in and told him to draft a codicil to my will immediately. Then I told him to set up a camera. We sat in his conference room, the skyline behind me. Reynolds hit record. I looked into the lens. I imagined I was looking into Gavin's soul. "My name is Moses Carter," I said, my voice projecting with the authority of a man who has survived an assassination attempt. "Today is Tuesday. I am of sound mind and body. I am making this public statement to ensure there is no confusion regarding my estate." I held up the new document Reynolds had just notarized. "This is my new last will and testament. Effective immediately, I have disinherited my daughter Nia Carter and her husband Gavin Miller. They will receive nothing, not a penny, not a brick. But here is the important part." I leaned closer to the camera. "I have included a poison pill clause. In the event of my death, if the cause is anything other than natural causes confirmed by 2 independent autopsies, or if my death occurs under suspicious circumstances, such as a sudden accident, 100% of my estate, including all insurance payouts, property, and liquid assets, will be immediately transferred to the United Negro College Fund and the local police widows fund." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I am worth more alive than dead Gavin. If I die, you get nothing. If I die, you get investigated. If I die, you go to jail poor. So you better pray for my good health, son. You better look both ways when I cross the street to make sure I don't trip, because my heartbeat is the only thing keeping you out of prison." Reynolds stopped the recording. We posted it to my Facebook page. We emailed it to Gavin. We emailed it to his parents. We emailed it to the insurance company. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from Marcus. He sent me a text. He just saw it. He is in his car outside the pawn shop. He is screaming. He just smashed his phone on the dashboard. "You broke him, Mr. Carter." I looked at the text and felt a grim satisfaction. I had taken the target off my back and painted it on his greed. I was safe for now. But a broken man is a dangerous man, and I knew the final confrontation was coming. I pounded the heavy wooden "for sale" sign into the front lawn myself, driving it deep into the earth with a sledgehammer. It stood like a tombstone marking the end of their tenure. Within the hour, Gavin and Nia appeared on the sidewalk. They parked their rental car across the street and paced back and forth like starving vultures. They looked haggard. Their clothes were wrinkled and stained, and they had the frantic, desperate energy of addicts going through withdrawal. Every time a car slowed down to look at the house, Gavin would rush forward, waving his arms. He shouted about black mold. He yelled about foundational cracks that didn't exist. He told a nice couple in a minivan that the basement flooded with sewage every time it rained. I watched them from the living room window, sipping my coffee. I didn't call the police. I didn't turn on the sprinklers. I let them scream. They thought they were sabotaging my financial rescue. They didn't realize that I didn't need the money. I wasn't selling the house to the highest bidder. I was selling it to the right bidder. I had set up a private showing by appointment only. The real buyers came through the back alley entrance while Gavin was busy shouting lies at a mailman in the front yard. The viewing took place in the living room, which smelled of lemon polish and fresh paint. I had patched the holes in the drywall where Gavin had thrown his tantrums. I had ripped out the carpets stained with their wine and negligence. The house looked like it did before the parasites moved in. It looked like a home. There were 5 couples in the room. Among them was a man in a shiny suit who spent more time looking at his phone than the architecture. I recognized him. He was a card shark from the same underground games Gavin frequented, a plant sent to make a lowball offer or disrupt the sale. He started talking loudly about termites tapping on the solid oak mantel I had carved myself. I walked up to him and placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You are in the wrong house, son," I said, my voice low and hard. "The casino is downtown. This is a place for serious people. Get out before I call Marcus and tell him you are interfering with his payment plan." The color drained from his face. He knew Marcus. He scuttled out the back door without another word. That left 4 couples. Honest people. Working people. They looked at the crown molding. They touched the walls with respect. I wasn't running an auction. I was conducting an interview. I wanted to know who would water the grass. I wanted to know who would respect the wood. I wanted to know who deserved the castle I had built. Then I saw them. David and Sarah. They were a young African-American couple. David had drywall dust ground into his cuticles and work boots that were scuffed from actual labor. Sarah looked at the kitchen with wide, reverent eyes touching the granite countertops like they were holy relics. They reminded me of Etta and me 40 years ago. Hungry, tired, but building something together. David approached me, twisting his cap in his rough hands. "Mr. Carter," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "this is a beautiful home. It is built right. But we can't afford the asking price. The bank only pre-approved us for $200,000. We don't want to waste your time." I looked out the front window. Gavin was leaning against a tree, wiping sweat from his forehead, staring at the house with a hunger that made me sick. I looked back at David. "The price is $200,000, I said. David blinked. "David." "Sir, the listing says $450. "The listing is for strangers," I said. "The price for a man who knows the value of a hard day's work is $200,000. But there is a condition. We sign the papers right now, on the front porch, in plain view of the street." David looked at Sarah. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. We walked out onto the porch. Gavin saw us. He froze. He ran to the edge of the property line, his face twisting. "What are you doing?" he screamed. "You can't sell it. That is my house." I ignored him. I laid the contract on the table next to my iced tea. I handed David a pen. He signed. Sarah signed. I signed. It was done. I stood up and walked to the railing. I held up the contract so Gavin could see the wet ink. "It is sold, Gavin," I called out, "for less than half of what you tried to steal, and the new owners have a very strict policy about trespassers." Gavin fell to his knees on the sidewalk. He let out a scream of pure anguish. It wasn't grief. It was the sound of a man watching his winning lottery ticket turn into ash. I shook David's hand. "Welcome home, son," I said. I handed him the keys. The weight was gone. The house was safe, and Gavin was out in the cold forever. The house stood silent and dark in the moonlight, a hollow shell waiting for its new life. I sat in the security room in the basement watching the monitors. I knew he would come. Desperation is a predictable architect, and Gavin had run out of blueprints. At 3 a.m, a shadow moved across the back lawn. It was him. He was wearing dark clothes that were too tight and carrying a red plastic gas can that looked heavy in his weak grip. He moved with the jerky, twitchy rhythm of a man who has lost his mind. He pried open the basement window, the one with the latch I had intentionally left loose. He slipped inside, dropping to the concrete floor with a thud. I watched him on the high-definition screen. His face was pale, sweating, and his eyes darted around the room like a cornered rat. He thought he was clever. He thought the homeowner's insurance policy, which still had his name on the paperwork due to a clerical lag, was his golden parachute. He thought if the house burned down, the payout would clear his debts to Marcus and give him a fresh start. He did not care about the history in these walls. He did not care about the sweat I poured into the foundation. He only saw a pile of wood that was worth more as ash. He walked up the stairs to the main floor, the gas can sloshing in his hand. He began to pour. He started in the kitchen, dousing the cabinets I had installed myself. The liquid splashed onto the hardwood floors, creating dark pools that reflected the moonlight. He moved to the living room, throwing gasoline onto the curtains and the baseboards. He was crying. I zoomed in on his face. He was sobbing, muttering to himself a mantra of madness. Just burn it. Just burn it, and it is over. He emptied the can in the hallway right outside the master bedroom where his wife used to sleep. He tossed the empty container aside. It clattered loudly in the empty house. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver Zippo lighter. He flipped the lid open. The metallic click echoed through the speakers in my security room. He struck the flint. A small orange flame flickered to life, illuminating his terrified face. He held the fire in his hand, the creator of his own destruction. He hesitated for a second, staring at the flame. Then he dropped it. I sat in my chair, my finger hovering over the control panel, but I did not press the button. Not yet. I needed him to commit the act. I needed the intent to become action. I needed the crime to be absolute. I watched the lighter fall in slow motion. It hit the gasoline-soaked floor. Whoosh! A line of fire raced across the hallway, climbing the walls like a living thing. The orange glow filled the screen, washing out the night vision cameras. Gavin scrambled backwards, scrambling toward the back door, the exit strategy he had planned in his fevered brain. He reached for the handle. He turned it. It didn't budge. He yanked it hard, rattling the frame. Locked. He ran to the front door, screaming now, the fire roaring behind him, eating the oxygen in the room. He threw himself against the heavy oak door. Locked. He ran to the window, the big bay window in the living room. He picked up a chair to smash the glass, but before he could swing, metal shutters slammed down over the outside of every window and door in the house. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was deafening. It was the sound of a steel cage slamming shut. I had installed the remote hurricane shutters years ago to protect against storms. Tonight they were protecting society from Gavin. He was trapped. He dropped the chair and spun around his back to the sealed window facing the growing inferno. He was screaming my name now. Moses, let me out. Moses, please. He knew I was watching. He knew I was the architect of his prison. I waited 5 seconds. 5 seconds to let him feel the heat. 5 seconds to let him understand the consequences of burning down a man's legacy. Then I pressed the blue button on my console. A siren wailed inside the house, a piercing shriek that drowned out the roar of the fire. From the ceiling, recessed nozzles I had installed during the renovation popped open. They didn't spray water. Water damages the structure. They sprayed a chemical fire suppressant, a thick white foam that smothered the flames instantly. The room filled with a dense fog, choking the fire and stealing the heat. Gavin fell to his knees, coughing and retching, covered in the white sludge. The fire was out. The house was saved. But Gavin was ruined. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. I did not have to explain much. The automated alarm system had already alerted them. I walked up the basement stairs and unlocked the side door just as the flashing lights of the police cruisers flooded the front yard. I stepped out into the cool night air. The house looked peaceful from the outside, the shutters down, hiding the violence within. The police rushed, the porch weapons drawn. I pointed to the side door. "He is inside," I said. He tried to burn it down. The officers breached the door. They found Gavin curled in a fetal ball on the kitchen floor, covered in foam, shivering and weeping. They dragged him out in handcuffs. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He looked at me as they walked him past. His eyes were empty holes. He saw me standing there, untouched and calm. He saw the father he had tried to kill. He saw the man he had underestimated. I did not look away. I did not smile. I just watched him get loaded into the back of the patrol car. The ambulance arrived, but they didn't load him in. He wasn't hurt. He was just done. Nia came running down the street moments later, her hair wild, her face a mask of terror. She saw Gavin in the car. She saw the police. She saw me. She collapsed on the sidewalk, wailing. It was a sound of pure loss. She knew the money was gone, the husband was gone, the house was gone, and she was alone in the dark. I turned my back on her and walked over to the fire chief to give my statement. The fire was out, but the cleansing was finally complete. The heavy steel door slid shut with a sound that echoed like a tomb sealing forever. I sat on the cold metal stool in the visitation room of the county lockup where the air smelled of industrial bleach and hopelessness. On the other side of the thick plexiglass sat a man I hardly recognized. Gavin. The Italian suits were gone, replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His hair was shaved, revealing the pale scalp beneath. His arrogance had been scrubbed away, leaving only a trembling shell of a man who looked 20 years older than his age. He picked up the phone, his hands shaking violently. "Moses," he rasped, his voice cracking. "Thank God you came. You have to get me a lawyer. The public defender is useless. They are talking about 15 years for arson and attempted insurance fraud. You have money, Moses. Please. I know I messed up, but I am family. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me a burden. The man who had tried to burn down my legacy with a silver lighter. I leaned forward and pressed the button on the intercom. I did not come here to hire a lawyer, Gavin. I said, my voice calm and flat. I came here to see if the orange suit fit. It does. It suits you better than the ones I paid for. You aren't family, Gavin. You are an inmate. And I am the witness who put you there. I hung up the phone. He screamed silently behind the glass, slamming his fist against the barrier, his mouth forming desperate words I refused to hear. I stood up, buttoned my cashmere coat, and walked out. I didn't look back. That chapter was closed and the key was thrown away. 2 weeks later, I went to the grocery store on the edge of town. It was a discount supermarket, the kind with fluorescent lights that hummed and linoleum floors that had seen better days. I pushed my cart down the aisle, filling it with fresh vegetables and prime cuts of meat because I could afford to eat well. I approached the checkout lanes. Lane 4 was open. I put my basket on the belt. The cashier was keeping her head down, scanning items with a mechanical lethargy. She wore a red vest that was too big for her shoulders. Her name tag hung crookedly. I looked at her hands. The expensive manicure was gone. The nails were bitten down to the quick and the skin was chapped. I looked at her face. It was gaunt. Her cheekbones protruded sharply and her eyes were dull-rimmed with dark circles that cheap makeup could no longer hide. It was Nia, my daughter. The girl who once told me she would rather die than work a minimum wage job was now scanning coupons for strangers. She grabbed a carton of milk and looked up to find the barcode. Her eyes met mine. She froze. The carton slipped from her fingers and hit the belt with a heavy thud. "Daddy," she whispered. Her voice was a ghost of the demanding tone she used to have. She looked at my suit. She looked at the expensive food on the belt. She looked at herself. The shame radiating off her was palpable, hot, and suffocating. She looked like she wanted to run, but she couldn't. She needed this shift. She needed the $10 an hour to survive. She finished scanning my items, her hands trembling so badly she dropped the receipt twice. The total came to $140. I pulled out my wallet. I pulled out a crisp stack of bills. I saw her eyes track the money. A hunger flared in them, a desperate primal need that made my stomach turn. "Daddy," she said, her voice dropping to a hiss so the manager wouldn't hear. "I am staying at a shelter. I am hungry. I don't have money for lunch. Please, just $20. Just enough for a meal." I looked at her. I remembered the tomato soup I made her. I remembered how she threw it in my face with her lies about a pregnancy. I handed her the cash for the groceries. Then I pulled out an extra $100 bill. I placed it on the counter. She reached for it, her fingers twitching. I put my hand over it, stopping her. "This is not for my daughter." I said, my voice low enough that only she could hear. "My daughter died the day she called me a burden and tried to steal my life. This is a donation to a stranger who looks like someone I used to know. Take it, buy some food, and then never speak to me again. If you see me on the street, cross to the other side. If you see my name, ignore it. You wanted to be independent, Naya. Now you are." I slid the bill toward her. She grabbed it, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. She was crying silent tears that cut tracks through the cheap foundation on her face. I picked up my bags. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of the automatic doors into the bright sunshine, leaving the stranger in the red vest behind in the artificial light. The terminal hummed with the frantic energy of 1,000 departures, but for the first time in my life, I was not rushing to fix a problem. I walked through the atrium of the airport, pushing a single carry-on bag that weighed less than the tools I used to carry on my belt every day. I had sold the truck. I had sold the remaining equipment. I had signed the final papers, transferring the house to David and Sarah. The closing was quick and clean. I left them the furniture, I left them the garden, and I left them the peace I had fought so hard to secure. I took only what mattered. My passport, my wallet, and the picture of Etta I kept in my breast pocket. People rushed past me, checking their watches, stressing over connections, yelling into their phones. I moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who owns his own time. I looked at the departure board. Tokyo, London, Rome. The names flickered in amber lights, promising worlds I had only ever seen in magazines while waiting for cement to dry. I was 71 years old, and for 40 years I had been a pillar. I had been the foundation that held everyone else up. I had borne the weight of the roof, the walls, and the storms. But pillars do not move. Pillars stay stuck in the ground until they crack. Today I was no longer a pillar. I was a bird. I walked toward the security checkpoint. I did not look back at the city skyline visible through the massive windows. I did not look back at the jail where Gavin sat in an orange suit. I did not look back at the discount grocery store where Nia scanned items for strangers. That city was a job site I had finished. The contract was closed. The final inspection was done. I placed my shoes in the bin. I walked through the scanner. I stepped into the airside terminal and felt the recycled air fill my lungs. It tasted like jet fuel and liberation. I found a seat near the gate and watched the heavy planes lift off the tarmac, defying gravity with a roar that shook the glass. I had time to think. I had time to sit with the silence in my head. For years I told myself that love meant sacrifice. I told myself that being a good father meant shielding my child from every sharp edge of the world. I thought I was protecting Naya. I thought I was giving her the life I never had, but I was wrong. I was not protecting her, I was crippling her. I was stealing her resilience. I was teaching her that consequences were things that happened to other people. I created the weakness that Gavin exploited. It was a hard truth to swallow, bitter as bile, but I drank it down. I had to break my family to save myself. It sounded selfish. It sounded cruel. But as I sat there watching the baggage carts scurry across the asphalt, I realized that self-preservation is not a sin. It is a duty. Etta would have hated what they did to me. She would have hated the lies and the theft. But she would have hated my passivity even more. She told me once that you cannot keep someone warm by setting yourself on fire. I had been burning for years. I had been turning myself into ash so they could stay comfortable. Now the fire was out. The smoke had cleared. I was scarred. I was older. My joints clicked when it rained and my heart had a few cracks in the mortar, but I was still standing. I was still Moses Carter, and I had a lot of living left to do. I touched the pocket where Etta's picture rested. We had always talked about Paris. We talked about drinking coffee in a cafe and watching the river. We talked about it while we paid mortgages, while we paid tuitions, while we paid for weddings. We deferred the dream until it was too late for her. But it was not too late for me. I was taking her with me in my heart. We were finally going. Boarding began for Flight 84 to Charles de Gaulle. I did not wait for Zone 5. I walked up with Zone 1. I handed my boarding pass to the agent. She scanned it. It beeped a happy green sound. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Carter," she said with a smile. I walked down the jet bridge. I turned left when I entered the plane. First class, seat 2A, a window seat. The chair was wide leather, soft and inviting. I sat down and stretched my legs. I did not have to worry about the cost. The money I had saved, the money I had protected, was finally being spent on the person who earned it. A flight attendant appeared instantly. "Champagne, Mr. Carter?" she asked, holding a tray with a crystal flute. "Yes," I said. "Thank you." I took the glass. The bubbles rose in a steady stream, golden and bright. I looked out the window as the plane began to push back from the gate. The engines whined, spooling up to full power. The cabin vibrated with potential energy. We taxied to the runway. The pilot came over the intercom announcing our flight time and the weather in Paris. Cool and rainy. Perfect. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. It was a text message. The name on the screen was Nia. My thumb hovered over the notification. I could see the preview. "Daddy, I am so sorry. I miss you. Please call me. I am scared." I stared at the words. A month ago, those words would have made me turn the car around. A month ago, they would have made me open my wallet. But today, they were just pixels on a screen. They were the last gasp of a ghost. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt nothing. The cord was cut. I did not reply. I did not type a lecture. I pressed the side button on the phone, holding it down until the power-off slider appeared on the screen. I slid it across. The screen went black. The connection was severed. The plane accelerated, pressing me back into the seat. The ground fell away. The cars, the houses, the prison, the grocery store. They all shrank until they were nothing but lines on a map. We punched through the clouds into the blinding sunlight above. I raised my glass to the empty seat next to me. "To us, Etta," I whispered. "To freedom." I took a sip. It tasted like the future. I used to believe that family was an unconditional bond written in blood, a contract that required me to give until I was empty. But I learned the hard way that you cannot save people who are determined to drown you just to stay afloat. True love is never a transaction, and respect is not something you buy with silence or money. It is something you command with boundaries. By walking away, I didn't just save my fortune, I saved my soul. To anyone out there feeling used by those you love, remember this: your dignity is the most valuable asset you own. Do not let anyone, not even your children, treat it like a discount item. If you believe that respect must be earned and justice is best served, cold hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of taking back control.